We all know that one person who thinks they know everything, right? But they don't, because nobody can know everything about everything. If they could, we wouldn't have so many mind-boggling mysteries that even the smartest historians, archaeologists, and scientists can't figure out. We've got a whole bunch of those mysteries for you in this video, so get ready to have your mind blown. Let's begin with a megalith that goes by two names, Sail Rock and Paris Rock. It's a colossal sandstone monolith close to the shore of the Black Sea in Krasnodar Krai, Russia, and has been standing since the late Cretaceous age. The Sail Rock name comes from the distinctive shape of the massive rock, which looks a little like a ship's sail. The very existence of the rock seems to fly in the face of logic. It's 80 feet tall, 60 feet wide, but only about 3 feet thick at its thickest point. Weathering should have forced it to crumble thousands of years ago, but it remains standing. There's a large hole in the surface of Sail Rock, and nobody knows how it got there. The most commonly told story is that it was created as a defense against mountain artillery during the Caucasian War, but there's no evidence to support this. Sail Rock has been declared as a national monument in Russia since 1971 and is cared for by the local council, but there's no restriction on people visiting or even climbing on it. That might have to change if Sail Rock is to stick around for future generations to see. If you've ever wondered what Roman aristocrats did to pass the time between drinking wine and hosting parties, wonder no longer. Apparently, they were playing games using dice towers like this one, which was discovered almost exactly in between the villages of Freudsheim and Fettweisse in Germany in 1985. Based on the inscriptions on its surface, it may even have been a birthday gift. The text on one side celebrates a presumably recent military victory over the Picts, and the other side conveys good wishes to the gift's recipient. To be precise, it says, "Use this and live luckily," which is fairly blunt as goodwill messages go. Perhaps the Romans weren't big on sentiment. It's a remarkably complicated structure given its trivial use. Dice would be dropped in at the top and plunged through 3 levels before emerging down the steps at the bottom, ringing bells on their way out. While we understand what it does, we don't have any information about the type of game it was used to play. The Romans definitely weren't sitting around tables playing Monopoly. So, what was this cute dice thrower used for? Whenever the weather outside turns cold and you switch on your central heating, remember to thank the ancient Romans. They came up with the idea. The ancient Roman equivalent of the kind of central heating we know and love today was the hypocaust. They were a common feature in the homes of wealthy people in the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago. Seneca, one of the most popular and respected writers of the era, had a hypocaust in his villa and wrote of it often. He considered it to be the height of luxury. And he was probably right. To make a hypocaust, Roman builders included spaces between the walls and floors of new buildings. They'd then place a fireplace into a corner of the building. The heat generated by the fire entered the spaces between the floors and walls and heated the entire property. With a big enough fire and an intelligent enough design, a single hypocaust system would be sufficient to heat a whole Roman bathhouse. This simple but effective design remained in use for several centuries. In fact, there's no reason why it couldn't be used in parts of the world where no central heating exists today. The Dendera Zodiac is a bas-relief that once formed part of a chapel dedicated to Osiris within the Hathor Temple in Dendera, a place that's already well known for the famous Dendera light bulb. Much like the Dendera light bulb, a lot of what we think appears in the Dendera Zodiac is down to a matter of interpretation. Most experts can agree that Taurus is represented by the inclusion of a bull, and Libra is there because the bas-relief includes scales. What experts can't agree on is its age. Some, like Jean-Francois Champollion, believe it to be from the late Ptolemaic period of around 2,300 years ago. Others, like John H. Rogers, think it's far older, dating to the New Kingdom period of 3,400 years ago. If Rogers and those who share his opinion are correct, the Dendera Zodiac might be the oldest ancient Egyptian attempt to draw a map of the night sky that still exists today. It might even have been the starting point of the complex system of astrology that later developed in Egypt. The entire bas-relief is now on display in the Louvre in Paris, France. We're heading to Arizona, USA next, because we're going to check out the Petrified Forest National Park just outside Holbrook. This area hosts the largest collection of petrified wood in the known world, and is also home to some huge fossils that are more than 200 million years old. The park covers an area of almost 150 square miles, extending into the Painted Desert to the north. During the Mesozoic era, the petrified forest was on the equator of the former supercontinent known as Pangaea. The climate would have been subtropical, a far cry from the arid desert of today. You'll still find a few out-of-place looking trees in the national park today, but most of them are so old that they've turned to stone. Camping in the Petrified Forest National Park is illegal, but if you're desperate to see it and spend some time here, you can take advantage of the motels and hotels offered by the neighboring communities. There isn't another national park like it in America. In fact, there probably isn't another national park like it in the whole world. Is Lindholm Høje in Nordresund, Denmark a stone circle? Well, it is in a way, but it's also much more than that. This field of jagged standing stones contains circles, but it also contains lines and other patterns. Rather than being an ancient calendar of the kind that many historians suspect most stone circles to be, Lindholm Høje is a huge cemetery that still holds the bodies of more than 700 Vikings. The first burials here actually took place in the early 4th century, long before the start of the Viking Age, but they became more frequent during the Viking era before suddenly coming to an unexplained halt in the early 10th century. The hillside location of the cemetery offers an excellent view of nearby Aalborg, but the city didn't even exist when the last person was laid to rest here. It would have been nothing but open fields. The unusual patterns made by the rocks sometimes appear to be effigies of longboats, with pointed stones at each end. There's also some evidence of large fires at the site, so the stone boats might have stood in for the real thing during traditional Viking funerals. Next up, it's Newspaper Rock in Monticello, Utah. This is one of the largest collections of petroglyphs in the world, serving as a record of more than 2,000 years of human activity in the region. The massive sandstone slab can be found in San Juan County. It's a stunning thing to look at, but understanding it is far more difficult. The precise meaning of many of the glyphs is unknown. The markings were made in sequence by the archaic, basket maker, Fremont, and Pueblo cultures, with the final glyphs added by Navajo and Anglo tribesmen. In the native Navajo language, Newspaper Rock is known as Tisehane, which means the rock that tells a story. There are more than 650 individual designs here, created by chipping away at the dark coating of so-called desert varnish that clings to the rock. Some of the designs are easy to identify as humans and animals, but there are also abstract designs that appear to be humanoid but with horns on their heads. It's entirely possible that we'll never understand all of the stories being told here. The ancient site of Jarlshof in Somborg, Scotland, looks like something that was taken from the pages of a Tolkien novel and then recreated by a present-day movie crew. Instead, this archaeological wonder is both genuine and ancient. Nobody lives here today, but Jarlshof was occupied for a very long time. The oldest structures at the site were created during the Bronze Age, with the most recent added as recently as the early 18th century. Somehow, the site managed to be forgotten almost as soon as it was abandoned, only for it to be rediscovered by archaeologists of the 19th century after a storm in the region raised the cliffs and exposed the ancient stones. The oldest Bronze Age village at Jarlshof was erected around 4,500 years ago, upon which another village was built during the Iron Age, and then another was built by Norse invaders in the early 9th century. The only surviving structure that's above ground level today is the old house of Somborg, which is said in folklore to be the first castle ever built by Scotsmen. It's the grass topping that's grown across so many of the structures at Jarlshof that gives it its fantasy-like air, but you have to peer beneath the grass to see the area's true history. Seeing as we're in Scotland, where we'll also find many examples of Neolithic art, let's talk about the mysteries known as either the Towie stones or Towie balls. They're sometimes labeled more simply as the carved stone balls, which isn't a very imaginative title. The balls are not especially rare, but finding multiple examples of them doesn't get us any closer to understanding why they were made, or what they were used for. The first example turned up in Aberdeenshire in the 19th century, but more of them were still being found as recently as 2013. They're small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, measuring on average between 2 and 5 inches in diameter, and can be made of any common rock, from granite to sandstone. Rather than being spherical, they're deliberately covered in raised areas, and decorated with intricate lines and circle patterns. Similar patterns have also been found on artifacts belonging to the Picts, who lived in Scotland 2,800 years ago. But the stones are far older than that. Some are thought to be more than 5,000 years old. Theories as to their use range from their potential use as weapons to a sort of resume carried around by masons to demonstrate their skills when seeking paid employment. But they're just guesses. It would be a little glib to describe Men-on-Tol in Cornwall, England, as a stone circle inside a stone circle, but it would also technically be accurate. The stone circle is a landmark in this part of the Cornish countryside, and at the heart of it is a circular stone with a hole carved through the center of it like a giant donut. Dating stones and rocks is notoriously difficult for archaeologists, so experts aren't sure whether Men-on-Tol dates to the Neolithic era or the Bronze Age. Either way, it's safe to say that the stones were cut and positioned here several thousand years ago. Local legends say that the circular stone is a magic portal, and that passing through it will improve your health. It might even make you more fertile in the process. It's also said that the circle is guarded by a type of fairy known as a piskie, and that the piskie will harshly punish anybody who attempts to damage the stone. The mysterious aura of the site is enhanced by the fact that it's almost totally hidden by farmland and can't be seen by visitors until they're almost on top of it. We're looking at discoveries old and new in this video, so here's one that comes from 1867. It's the Heinz-Gavel dagger, which was found on the Danish island of Genoa. Experts consider it the finest example of a fishtail flint dagger in existence, and say that it comes from the end of the Nordic Stone Age. That would make it around 3,800 years old. In Denmark, the Heinz-Gavel dagger is considered a national cultural icon, so much so that it appears on the country's 100 krona banknote. The description of the artifact as a fishtail dagger comes from the shape of its handle, although you could also argue that the shape of the blade looks like a fish too. It's thought that their design was based on bronze daggers made elsewhere in Europe. Some of these daggers found their way to Denmark, and although the ancient Danes couldn't replicate them, they were able to make something similar from local flint. Similar daggers continued to be made well into the region's Bronze Age, so it was a design that lasted for several centuries. The Naqsh-e-Rustam complex in Iran is a place that contains many ancient mysteries, but few buildings there provoke as much interest as the Cube-of-Zoroaster. The name translates into English as the Cube of Zoroaster, but it's actually a replica of the Prison of Solomon in Pasargadae, which was the first capital of the ancient Achaemenid Empire. Legend has it that within the structure there was once a fire that never went out, and that this fire was the source of all similar fires that once burned inside Zoroastrian temples. However, a lack of ventilation inside the Cube-of-Zoroaster means this is unlikely to have been the case, unless the ancient inhabitants of Naqsh-e-Rustam had a means of keeping a flame burning without it. The cube has been studied by countless academics, historians, and archaeologists, but there's still no consensus about its true purpose. Almost every expert agrees that it served a religious function, but nobody knows what the religious function was. The structure stands exactly opposite the mausoleum of Darius II, who ruled 2,400 years ago. So there may be a connection, but it's a connection we can only guess at.
Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!